having learned the three basic cuts, the kote, the men, and the do, one of the things that we mentioned is that kote, or that kendo, is something of a free-form sport. And what that means is you are now free to combine those three basic cuts into any type of sequence that you want. And so two of the basic nidan, or two-cut wazas, are kote men, a cut to the wrist, followed by a cut to the head, and then a kote do, a cut to the wrist, followed by the slash across the waist. But then, of course, these particular wazas, the thing about Kendo is that it's unlike Western fencing, which is usually done in a linear fashion. Kendo is done in what we call a circular fashion, and that is you can attack the person in any direction that you choose, including you can attack while you are retreating. These wazas are called hiki wazas, and so the hiki do, or the cut to the do while proceeding backwards, and the hiki men, the cut to the men, will actually going backwards away from the opponent instead of toward them. Then one of the things you can do is then you can combine all three of these types of things. You can combine the opening that you make, you can combine the kihon, and you can combine the direction that you're going in. But one of the things that the teacher, or the motodachi, will do is there's a practice called keiko. And what he will do is he will basically open so that a very obvious point is presented to the student, and it's up to the student to be able to see what that point is. Notice that the student must make the call, and notice that basically the student has only an absolute split second of time to be able to determine what point is intended by the instructor. So, kukari geiko, or opened practice. But now, after the student masters the observation of seeing what is actually opened by the instructor, of course, practices keiko. And what that means is both student and instructor are able to attack at will, meaning their sense of timing is completely independent from each other. This practice is called keiko, and this is the time when you're actually going to try the individual wazas that you want to create and master. Because, as we mentioned, since Kendo is a free-form practice, what that means is that you can come up with a specific combination of how you want to move your body, and a come-on waza to try to trick the opponent into attacking where you want them. And so we're going to try to master the timing and distance associated with those during what is called keiko, or free practice. So, while you are watching the keiko, please take a time to notice the things that we've mentioned. And that is, notice that which part of the shinai can be used for a valid strike. Notice which part of the bogu, or which part of the garment, can actually be received the proper strike. Notice that each of both the student and the instructor have to call the points accurately. Notice that they're using both hands on the blade. Notice that the attacks are all cuts instead of stabs, with the exception of the ski, or the stab to the throat. Notice that the cuts can come as the person is moving in any direction, either toward or away from the person that you're practicing fighting. And one of the things also is to notice the different kamae. And a kamae is just a Japanese word meaning position or opening. And notice that sometimes the person has the blade in the middle, sometimes the person has a blade over their head. Wakari kamae, waki kamae, is a blade actually hiding the blade behind your body so that the opponent cannot see the length. Haso no kamae, that carries the blade on the shoulder. And geidan kamae is not used in Kendo frequently, but a geidan simply means low, and the blade is lower than the waist or lower than the hands. Notice also, for people that are interested in Western fencing, there is no such thing as a right of way. And that is, if a person attacks you and you block off their attack, You do not have to resume a neutral position in order to counterattack on your own. You are free to counterattack whenever you see fit. Now, one of the things that you may notice from your Japanese history is that samurai frequently carried two swords, a katana, which was called the long sword, and a kodachi, which is literally the baby sword, or the short sword. And samurai, as a hereditary class of people, inherited the right to carry those two swords as part of their family's lineage. The kotachi, sensei is using the kotachi, or the short sword, and he's using it to defend himself against a katana, or a long sword. Notice that the cuts made by the kodachi to be a valid point are the same cuts that a person would use with a long sword, namely the cut to the wrist, the cut to the waist, and the cut to the cut to the head, or the men cut. One of the famous Japanese swordsmen was Musashi, and one of the things that he did was he used a two-sword. And so people who fight in the Mutashi style use nito, and what that simply means is you're fighting with two swords. One of the things that you'll notice, if you would come up close to see, is that the short sword, or the kodachi, and the long sword used by the nito practitioner is actually shorter than the long sword that's used by an ito, or what we call a single sword skill. And so basically you have a short and medium sword versus a long sword. Nito-ryu is taught less frequently in the States. There are Nito Kendo, much more Nito Kendo practiced in Japan. One of the things you will notice is that frequently the short sword is used as a sword to open the attack area between the opponents. So it's used only to move the defending sword out of the way before attacking with the medium-length sword. But you will also find Nito practitioners who do just the opposite. As long as the short sword is used with the proper dotatsu, or the length between the nakayui and the tip, and it lands on the proper part of the attack, or the attack of the point, i.e. the very top of the head between the two himo, and the upper part of the kote. Actually, the wrist and the knuckles are not part of the kote point, only the upper wrist. As long as the two dotatsus meet each other, the weapon dotatsu and the armor dotatsu, then you have a valid point. So Ippon, Kendo, or President in the white, scored a valid point because he met the criteria associated with the dotatsu of the sword and the dotatsu of the point that he wanted to make. A Kendo competition is made up of matches in between two individuals, and usually they last somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes. So there will be a lot more attempts at points than points actually awarded, because, like I said, in addition to the proper kiai and the proper part of the weapon and the proper part of the armor, you also have to demonstrate proper spirit. And one of the ways to do that is to line up your attack in such a way that you are not hiding behind your sword, and that you don't turn away from the opponent, which, if the opponent was only wounded and not killed, would actually give the opponent a time for counterattack. So that you must show that psychologically you have defeated your opponent utterly. And this type of demonstrating spirit during the matches is what makes Kendo judging very, very subjective. And so the Kendo people who judge Kendo have to be active practitioners, and they have to have the upper level ranks, which simply means that they are the people with the most experience. and ippon, or men point for presto. So. Now, one of the things that that you do in Kendo is, like I said, since you have the opportunity to arrange wazas into any sequence that you would like, some of the times what you're actually doing is you're going to encourage the other person to attack simply because you want to set up a waza that you think can actually you can make the attack faster, even though they started the sequence by attacking you first. Those are called oji wazas. And so after mastering the first set of basics, such as the kihon that we demonstrated, and then being able to open the shinai, then one of the next levels that you're going to demonstrate for the judges is that you can control the situation by actually controlling your opponent, making him attack when you want him to attack, simply so that you can set him up for failure. So, oji wazas, or some of the secondary wazas, or timing wazas that people will practice. And of course, one of the things we always like to say about Kendo is everything that you do has a counterattack. So, does it work all the time? Well, no. So, the basic is that you're going to practice so that your attacks succeed all the time, but of course remember that people that you're practicing with, of course, are also doing the same thing. They are training so that their attack is going to be the attack that works every time and is going to be able to overcome yours. So notice how the opponents basically protect the aggressive and the defensive space between them. They work on moving the shinais so that the attacking space is open. And then they attack using the proper sequencing, which are some of the things that we've talked about here for our seminar. Ippon. And menari, or men point from presto. We hope you've enjoyed our Kendo, or our Japanese sword fencing. We certainly enjoy it because my husband has been doing it for about 23 years. And I've been doing it for about 18. Kendo obviously is not for everyone, but if it was something that you're interested in, we practice downtown at the YMCA. We practice twice a week on Wednesday and Sunday. And we'll be happy to teach you everything we know about Kendo. It will take about 15 minutes. The rest is practice. The only way you get better at Kendo is to practice. And so when people ask you, why do we practice Kendo? The most honest answer we have for them is we practice Kendo so we can do better Kendo. At the end of practice, one of the things you'll do is you'll take your armor off, and then with a bow, you will acknowledge the teacher, and you will acknowledge the students that you practice with. And what we like to say is that despite all the yelling and all the hitting, that respect and courtesy are an incredibly important point. That's part of the dojo culture. And one of the reasons, if you ask why, the answer for us is pretty obvious, and that is, how many of you actually have friends that will let you hit them over the head on a regular basis? So if you have friends like that, you should cherish them. Thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of the lesson.